Imagine this. You finally get a free evening, a whole night to yourself to play video games. But instead of picking something and diving in, you find yourself scrolling through your library, browsing Steam, maybe watching a few reviews on YouTube. An hour later, and you still haven't pressed play on anything. It's like a never-ending cycle, always choosing, comparing, and researching, but rarely committing to anything. With thousands of games at our fingertips, why is the hardest part sometimes just starting? Today I'd like to talk about the paradox of choice, analysis paralysis, and why, for many of us, the real game might just be the act of looking at games themselves. The paradox of choice is a term that's become all too relevant in modern gaming. It means that having too many options can overwhelm us, actually making it harder to choose and be satisfied with our decisions. And the problem is real. Between platforms like Steam, the Nintendo eShop, Xbox Game Pass, Humble Bundle, and even itch.io, among many others, we're looking at millions of possible experiences. Games that fit every niche, every mood, every level of commitment. And that's great, right? In theory, yeah, it's awesome that we live in times like these, but the reality is that endless options create endless questions. What if I pick the wrong one? What if there's a better game I'm missing? What if I don't like this one? This leads us to treating gaming as though it's some kind of hyper-researched investment decision. And while it can be in some cases, it doesn't have to be for every single time we pick up a controller. At some point, it stops being about enjoyment and starts being about the stress of optimizing every last minute and min-maxing the little free time we do have. You'd think more choice would make it easier to find a perfect game made just for us. But it can actually make you feel like you're making the wrong choice all the time. Over the past few years, I've struggled, as I'm sure many others have, to find an MMORPG to consider a home base. I've been playing Entropia Universe for like 15 years, but don't play enough to consider it my main game. I played the hell out of Elder Scrolls Online, but ended up disliking the direction the game was headed in and got burnt out. The alternatives like Guild Wars 2, Throne and Liberty, Lord of the Rings Online, New World, Final Fantasy XIV, etc. didn't quite appeal to me for making the switch. Each game has its own pros and cons that I analyzed for far too long, and after a long while of deliberation and testing out each game, I landed back at the place where I started my MMO journey, old school RuneScape. But even then, that's not after analyzing RuneScape 3, Classic RuneScape, and 2009scape, and eventually landing on OSRS. We're all familiar with analysis paralysis, that feeling of being stuck in decision-making mode, and being unable to move forward. In gaming, it shows up in ways we might not even recognize. How often do you spend time reading reviews, watching gameplay videos, or scrolling through gaming forums, hoping to find the right game? I mean, in a way, that process becomes its own form of entertainment, a kind of meta gaming experience, where your game is some kind of analysis of the potential to play games. And the games themselves are often left sitting in your library, unplayed, collecting digital dust. Take the rise of wishlisting. Adding games to a list for later is a simple feature, but it fuels this behavior by letting us keep tabs on games, even if we're not really planning on playing them anytime soon. And as that list grows, so does the weight of each unplayed game, making it even harder to settle on a single choice. This is my wish list sitting at 73 items, and that's after cleaning it up and trying to narrow it down a bit. I suspect I'll only ever play maybe 5 or so of these games, but still, they sit here in the wish list, and when some of these unreleased titles come out, I'll spend a bunch of time reading reviews and checking in on their progress. I think a big part of all this also comes from the pressure we put on ourselves to make the right choice, especially with limited time. For those of us with busy schedules filled with work, family, stress, exercise, creative endeavors, and all of that stuff, the stakes can feel even higher because gaming time is precious, rare time. So we end up trying to maximize the experience before we even start, looking for the game that will give us the most bang for our buck, or rather for our time. This is definitely true of my MMORPG conundrum. I didn't want to pick the wrong game because I'd feel guilty if I spent dozens or even hundreds of hours in a game that I didn't end up liking once the endgame content was near. I didn't want to get myself into a situation where the grind becomes so monotonous that you're forced into microtransactions to keep your build relevant. So many little factors come into play here, and it certainly makes it more difficult to actually settle on something when the little free time you do have is so precious. Then there's the fact that for some of us, game discovery has genuinely become a pastime in itself. Scrolling through the stores, reading reviews, and looking up games online has a certain addictive quality to it. You're exploring new worlds and discovering new ideas, just in a more abstract way. It's like being a collector of gaming experiences without actually owning them. You're curating your personal list of the must-plays, and it's satisfying to feel like you know what's out there. Look at how many YouTube channels, blogs, and podcasts revolve entirely around game recommendations, previews, and hidden gems lists. I think this is why top 10 games or best indie games you haven't played videos are so popular. They tap into our enjoyment of discovery without the commitment to actually playing each game. It's worth asking, is there something about this discovery process that feels safer than the actual commitment of playing a game? Maybe. Once you pick a game and start playing, you're in it. You're either going to have a good time or not. But staying in the discovery phase keeps all of your options open, and there's a certain comfort in that freedom. Here's a Reddit post from the Patient Gamers subreddit that fits in well here. Buying games instead of playing them. I just wonder whether some of you have a similar problem. I realized that I have a tendency of buying games instead of playing them. Especially on Steam or GOG, I scroll through the stores every day, and every couple of months I buy a couple of games for like $50, only when they're cheaper and never spend more than $20 on a single game. My theory is that I just like the feeling that I could play them. I also think that I invest the money so that I might start playing something again. I invest money in something I love instead of doing it. Sounds crazy, but somehow this is like it is. I read a lot about what other people play and suggest, and so I always have new games to buy and eventually playing someday. Everything also has probably something to do with me being a supposed grown-up adult and not having much time on my hand, but obviously some money. But when I play games, eventually I have a wonderful time. Play Hearthstone regularly, love The Messenger, Dead Cells, Katana Zero. Sometimes it just needs like 30 minutes of gaming. So I like to know, do you or did you have a similar problem when it comes to gaming? Do you have any tips or ideas on how to cope with this? Thanks for taking your time reading this. Any tips are appreciated. And a really good comment from that thread. I used to do this a lot until I actually sat down and organized my backlog. Once I realized how huge it was, I stopped buying games unless they were at least 75% off, and not allowing myself to make exceptions. That was about 2 years ago. I have since played 20 games from my backlog and bought 8 new ones, roughly. So my tips would be, organize your backlog. What do you have, and which of those games do you want to play? Make a rough priority list ranging from must play to meh. Organize your wish list. Is there any deal.com works best for this as it's not platform specific, unlike Steam's wishlist feature. Check review sites on any games you're unsure about, or ask the folks over at subreddit Should I Buy This Game. Set rules for yourself for buying games on sale. Is 50% good enough of a discount, or are you willing to push it as high as 80%? Stick to this rule. Whenever you're tempted to break it, have a look at your backlog and ask yourself if there's a good reason to increase its size even further. Another part of this issue is that sometimes it feels like progress just to research games. We can end up thinking, if I know what's out there, I'm staying ahead of the curve. This illusion of progress can become addicting. You feel productive because you're doing something game-related, even if you're not actually playing. It's a little like prepping to game rather than gaming itself. The fear of missing out, or FOMO, also plays a role. The gaming community moves fast. New releases, major updates, surprise indie titles being stealth dropped. It's all happening constantly, and the fear of missing out on the next big thing can make us hesitant to commit to any one title. Instead, we spread our attention across a dozen games, never fully diving into any of them, hoping to stay current, but often ending up overwhelmed by choice fatigue. Now, is it necessarily a bad thing if our favorite game turns out to be looking at games? There's definitely value in the thrill of discovery and the knowledge that comes from researching titles, but I think it's worth considering how this habit affects our relationship with gaming as a whole. If it's starting to take over our actual gaming time, then maybe it's worth asking if we're getting as much enjoyment as we could be. Maybe we're looking at our gaming time as something that has to be perfectly optimized, especially with so many games to choose from. But gaming doesn't always need to be efficient. It doesn't have to be optimized or even particularly well chosen every single time. Some of the best gaming experiences come from unexpected finds or games you started on a whim. So, how do we break the cycle? Part of it is just recognizing when we're slipping into the habit of browsing instead of playing. It might mean setting a rule for yourself, like picking a game in 5 minutes and just going with it, no second guessing. Maybe it's about limiting your wish list to games you genuinely plan on playing soon, or maybe it's about organizing your backlog and making a list based on priority for the games that you actually plan on playing. There's also something to be said for embracing smaller, more experimental titles. Indie games, short narratives, and bite-sized experiences are easier to dive into and can give you a sense of completion without that heavy commitment. Plus, shorter games leave more time for variety, which can help keep the fear of missing out at bay. So maybe our favorite game has become looking at games, but that doesn't mean we can't change the way we approach it. We're lucky to live in a time when gaming has more choice than ever, but sometimes the best experiences come from not overthinking and just diving in. At the end of the day, it's about finding a balance between the thrill of discovery and the real magic that happens when you hit play. Gaming should be about the experience itself, not the endless pursuit of the so-called perfect one. Thanks for sticking around to the end if you made it this far. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.